Senator Harvey, we can go ahead and get started.
All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Construction Subcommittee of the License Reform Task Force. Aaron, can you please start with roll?
Yes, thank you. Senator Harvey
Here.
and Bob Dean.
Here.
Senator Noland? Not yet. Okay. Senator Zolnikoff?
Here.
Representative Seconder? Representative Teal?
Here.
Director Strauss? I just promoted him. He's here. Webb Brown? No. John Harding?
Yeah.
Troy Jensen emailed and said he could not attend today. Allison Paul
Here.
and Jason Small.
Here.
Okay, that is it for task force members. For staff on the call today, I'm Erin Sullivan, policy analyst with the Department of Labor. And we also have Quinlan O'Connor, who is the chief legal counsel and this subcommittee's counsel. Kevin Bragg, who is the bureau chief for licensing, and Lisa Patzer, who is our technology expert. So, same group.
All right. Thanks, Aaron. So now we're going to jump into construction contractor and independent contractor program and enforcement review. As you guys are all aware, that the last meeting, Senator Nolan brought up some issues around bonding and enforcement, and so we had asked for some data, and so this is our opportunity to take a look at that data and have a discussion around that. So, uh, Aaron, is that with you, or who is that?
Yeah, I can go ahead and just review the documents that were sent out, and
Okay.
then we can just take a discussion from there. Let's see here. So, would you have a preference on which one you'd like to start with, the bonding or the ICEC denials?
We can start with the bonding.
Okay, I'll go ahead and share my screen. And not to call anybody out, but I do, Hugh Pratt is also on the call, and he was the one that had presented on this at the last meeting and offered to do the follow-up. And so this paper that I sent out and that's also posted on the website for the public is based on his research that he provided. But the question was kind of what was the legislative history behind bonding requirements for contractors. So you can see it's a pretty lengthy paper, but it's got some really good information in there, and it just talks about how the background, the question that was presented for the purposes of this follow-up was that this subcommittee requested a memo summarizing the legislative and legal history of bond requirements, and then kind of what was the backstory basically, and the status of bond requirements under current law. So you can see on page 2, there's a nice chronology of key events that talked all the way back in 1995 when this idea first started, and then kind of what happened, how the different committees reacted to it, and what the testimony addressed. And then some changes in 1996. There was a civil action that challenged this provision, and so then there was actually a restraining order, and so the bonding requirements didn't actually go into effect. And then in 1997, there was some more work done. And so you can see right here that there was Senate Bill 45 that would revise the contractor registration laws, and there was testimony that supported removing the bond requirements. And then, so you can read all of that. And then nothing happened. Oh, I guess in 1998, there was a final judgment that was entered in favor of the state of Montana. And so then nothing happened until just this past session when we moved contractor registration to a licensing program. And so that's what the chronology is. And then the rest of the paper just kind of goes through um, some key points on what the bond looked like in 1995, and then testimony supporting it, testimony opposing it, the legal challenge, and then what happened in 1997. And then starting on page 5, we've got the current statutory framework, which is so what's in place right now, the transferring to a licensing program, and that there's no general bond requirement in current licensing statute. But we do have enforcement opportunities through unprofessional conduct and penalties. And that and then here's an analysis just for your consideration that just kind of shows based on all of this, there was a deliberate move away from general bonding, and that bond purpose is now addressed through other compliance mechanisms. And then just kind of saying if this committee were to recommend reinstating a bond requirement, there would be some, administrative consequences, I guess, and that the conclusion is that it was intentional for the bonding requirements to be removed. And so that's that paper, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Aaron. Yeah, and thanks to staff for all the work on that. That's a very great layout and framework of kind of how we got to where we're at today. At this point, I'll open it up to the committee for further comments on the issue around bonding in its entirety. So, all right, I'm not seeing any hands there. John, go ahead.
So I don't remember from the last meeting. I know we talked about bonding, and I know that there used to be a requirement. It would almost the bond back in the 90s would have been something that probably was equivalent to a bond such as a notary public has. The bond was a very low cost bond, and it wasn't in the world of bonding. You can't really bond a contractor or a general contractor without having an actual contract on a project. You don't have a general bond that just covers every project that you ever touch or every estimate that you ever provide. The bond is on a job by job basis, and a company, in order for any construction company to bond, they've got to have a pretty significant set of financial records that they provide to their bonding agent, and the bonding agent would ultimately determine the amount of bondability that contractor has. So this bond that came with ICECs and contractor registration back in the 90s really was, like I said, just more of I'm not even sure how a notary public bond works, but it always reminded me of something like that this was more of just some general bond that I think seemed like it might have almost protected the contractor more than it did anybody else. It just didn't have much purpose. And what the legislature did, this is a big document. Thanks for putting this together, Aaron. It's a lot of information, but it's a good summary of that. But it was absolutely intentional to get rid of that, and it wasn't very well received in the beginning. So I can't imagine that this committee or subcommittee would want to entertain doing something to restart reintroducing bonding.
Thank you, John. Further comments on bonding? All right. I'll just make a brief comment. I tend to agree with John that, reading through this history and uh, seeing why it went away, I think there's some different avenues to get at some of the concerns that Senator Nolan brought up. I think there's some other enforcement mechanisms out there. I feel that a lot of it also relies back on how good localities and municipalities are defining their contracts with these contractors. And, I definitely understand Senator Nolan's concerns, but I also wonder kind of how the contracts shake out with these folks, and if there isn't some enforcement or some legalese that could solve this problem instead of coming back to this a bonding approach. So that's just my comment on it. Last call for comments on bonding. All right. Seeing none, Aaron, we can now run into the ICEC denials.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And share my screen again. Here we go. So for this one, and this was Tracy Gonzalez was the one that was talking a lot at the last meeting about independent contractor exemption certificates in the process. And so she put together the basis for this paper. And so the question was, what are the kind of trends and what are the denials? Like why would an ICEC application get denied? And so you can see that administrative, forgetting some part of the application is really the main reason why these denials happen. And so it says across calendar years 2023 through 2025, routine application issues accounted for nearly all of the denials each year, and that we're kind of trending the same way this year. So this paper just talks a little bit about like the legal framework, as you know, who needs to obtain an ICEC, and then to obtain it they have to swear to and acknowledge to two core elements, which I'm not going to go into exactly what an independent contractor is because that was what the discussion was at the last meeting, if I can remember back a month. But there's some references here in this paper to the actual MCAs, and so if anybody's interested in reading those, if you haven't already. Then the denial data. So this was really what was asked of Tracy to compile. So denial reasons, and so routine application issues you can see across the board. Like for this year, just in the first 6 months, out of 115 denials, 113 of those were because of routine application issues, and only two actually failed one of the two-prong test, I guess maybe is the best way to say it. And you can see that it's the control and lack of business is very, very low for reasons for denied. And here's some percentages as well. So it's just this table in a percentage form instead of a number form. So you can, and then it's just some more stats. And then the rest of the paper kind of talks about some trends in denial categories. So obviously routine application issues where not all the information that was requested was provided. And so an incomplete application, or failure to submit evidence that the applicant has an independently established business. And then it also talks about kind of what happens when there is an incomplete application. So the applicants do get two notices before denial, and they're given time to remedy. So it's not like it's a big red X. You get one shot at this. There is obviously, we want to be able to complete these applications and move forward with these exemption certificates. And so time to remedy the deficiency is the first course of action. So if they satisfy the requirements within 6 months, then they could be approved. And so, yeah, our approach, the department's approach, is remedial and compliance oriented. It's not punitive. And then the next one is lack of business or questionable occupations. And so this just kind of gives some examples. And then same with control and the employer-employee relationship indicators. So that's, the big thing. Are you an employee? Are you 1099, whatever? And then it goes on to talk about the appeal and post-denial review process. And so there are appeal rights for this, and it says, kind of what the timeline is for that and the process. Again, references to all the rules and statutes. And then here's your takeaways. So denials, they're procedural. we can't really help if somebody doesn't complete their application. And so but the program is designed to provide notice and cure opportunities. Denials for substantive cause are rare, and the yeah, appeal pathway it's available, but it's seldom used. And so this it shows that there is a stable and consistent trend. Routine application issues account for nearly all denials. So I guess at the very end of the conclusion it says, so the principal policy question is not whether denials are being issued too frequently for substantive reasons, but whether the application guidance and industry education can further reduce routine correctable denials, while preserving the department's ability to address real issues. So that is what Tracy and I came up with for this request.
Thanks, Aaron. So if you could keep it up on the screen there for a second, and we can kind of talk about that recommended framing for the subcommittee discussion. So the main question as we're going through this that I had is exactly that first bullet point. Is there staff available to help these folks review it prior to submission? Can we talk a little bit about that? And is there need for staffing? Is there adequate staffing, but people aren't utilizing it?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess we could probably start with Kevin, and he could call on Tracy if he wants to talk through that.
Okay.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. I'm going to defer that to Tracy as she works specifically with that group. I'll get her promoted.
Thanks, Kevin.
Hello. Hi.
Hi, Tracy.
Thank you. Yeah, so we do have staff available for that really walk people through the application process all day, every day on the phone. A lot of what they do is intaking those questions from the public, from people who are interested in those applications, and they walk them through pretty detailed on how to apply, what they're looking for with their occupations, what type of business documents. That we see quite often. We don't provide legal advice to them, but we do just walk them through that process there. We also have a tutorial that was done. It was a partnership that was put on between us and Accelerate Montana. And so that walks people through that process as well, the application process, and what to consider if they're really truly an independent contractor or more of an employee, that maybe they wouldn't qualify. So we do have the tutorial and information available on the website as well. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy. Just one quick follow-up while we have you there. Is it is the information that's missed, is it the same question on each one usually, or is it kind of spread out throughout the application process?
I'd say a lot of what we get missed is the application simply isn't filled out correctly. That will be resolved to a large degree when we do go online and when they walk through an online application, because the fields will be required and they won't be able to miss those. But a lot of it is just the business documents. They have trouble gathering those and providing those to us, the 15 points worth. And sometimes it's just a matter of they need to just call us and we can kind of, ask them, hey, do you have education, or do you have past training certificates, things like that that they don't think about, that can also qualify as the business documents. So I'd say largely it's the business documents that they struggle to provide the 15 points worth.
Okay. Thank you, Tracy. Yeah, that I was kind of wondering. I'm glad to hear we're going online. I was wondering if it was kind of a format issue that they were stumbling upon there. So, um, any questions for Tracy? And Allison, I saw you had your hand up prior. Do you have anything for Tracy or just overall on this topic?
A little bit of both, but thank you,
Okay.
Senator Harvey.
Yeah.
And so so at what I do at Montana Legal Services, a lot of what we do is take court forms and make them more easier for people to understand. And I'm wondering like at what educational level are some of the instructions written? Has anybody, I haven't looked at it. So if we haven't paid attention to that, that's a good way to help people. The other is automated forms, which are pretty easy to do. And in this day and age, it's not as expensive as it used to be, where you can prompt people as they go through rather than just provide an online form and provide instructions. Is any of that being considered to help make it easier?
Yeah, so the application, the paper application is pretty wordy. There's a lot of disclaimers or attestations that people have to read through, and that is confusing. In the online process, we will have those instructional prompts for people. And again, um, just that education up front so that they can make that informed decision on whether they truly are established in their own business moving forward to start that process. But I do think that the online system, once that goes live, is going to cut down a lot of those mistakes. And then, yes, that instructional text is really important. So we are planning on having a little bit more of that also to help them out.
Yeah, yeah, I would support a recommendation that it be written at I mean, we look for an eighth grade reading level, which is really hard to do, but there are a lot of tools out there that help you do that. Because I think that for a lot of people, it doesn't matter how educated you are, things can be really complicated when you're trying to read it. My only other comment is the biggest challenge we see with working with people across the state is them being able to get their documents to you. So if you're talking about they're not attaching the right things or not submitting the right business license things, um, that rings very true. That happens. It's really difficult for people, and having a lot of really easy instructions about how to scan a document with a cell phone or other ways to make it super easy for people to submit, because that would be another part of a recommendation I would make.
Great.
Thank you, Allison.
Sure.
Further comments or questions for Tracy? John?
I just have one question for Tracy. How many ICEC applications annually are there? I mean, it looks like the denials are close to the same year after year after year, but how many total applications?
We have about 12,500, 13,000 applications that come in a year.
Okay,
Those are also renewals, so about 70% of those are renewals.
and that's an every 2 year process, right?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Uh, any other comments or questions around ICC denials? Please raise your hand. Kevin?
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Tracy, for taking that on the cuff. I do want to say I think part of the reason that our denials are so low is because of the staff that we have, and this is not a testament to me in any way, shape, or form. Our staff do an excellent job of walking through with folks and trying taking their time, and certainly appreciate any recommendations that the council can come up with. We have approximately 5 registration staff that work through that application load. And once we get things into our Acela database, which we're hopeful to do here in the next month, we'll see if we hit that mark. But once we get that in, we're hopeful we can streamline some of the things. And we've also got some tools online that show folks how to upload applications, but certainly appreciate Allison's comments about making sure that language is as readable as possible and at a level that everyone can understand. Sometimes code makes that difficult, but we are certainly happy to change things as we need to. But I did want to take a moment just to acknowledge our staff on the call. I think they do a great job and I'm really appreciative to them. So thank you for that, Chair Harvey.
Thank you. So, last call for comments or questions on ICEC. All right. Seeing none. Kind of moving through our agenda here.
Sorry, Senator Harvey.
Yep.
Sorry, sorry to interrupt. I didn't raise my hand either. Is the subcommittee interested in putting forward a recommendation for the department at this point? Because, and I guess I should have maybe said this in the very beginning. So at the meeting not next week, but in 2 Mondays, whatever, on June 8th, at the full task force meeting, each subcommittee is expected to propose recommendations for the full task force to consider to put in the final report. And I think I mentioned this at least on this for this committee, if not all of them, that they don't have to be statutory. They can be statutory recommendations, but they could also be guidance for the department or for boards or whoever. And so what Allison brought up could be crafted into a recommendation just for guidance for the department as they're developing this online application. So I don't want to make you do a recommendation, but I could certainly craft something up, draft something for the full task force to consider at the June 8th meeting.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. And I was actually heading that way as well. So,
Awesome.
yeah, so as far as the first topic around the bonding, I'm not seeing any, not hearing any recommendation from the subcommittee moving forward. Hmm. But definitely on the ICEC denials, I wholeheartedly agree with the issues that Allison brought up. I think government overall should look at kind of what standard we're putting out there as far as reading level and the approaches that we're taking to receiving any type of information. Uh, so I would recommend that we bring Allison's recommendations forward as one of our proposals through this process.
Thank you, Senator Harvey. I think the department probably is doing a really good job, but the support of staff, anything you can provide to support the staff's interactions with the public is what I was looking for, right?
Yep. Yeah, and Aaron, I know you're a wizard at all of this. If there is code issues, as Mr. Bragg said, there's a possibility of. Uh, could you flesh that out? And if we need legislation around that, we can definitely have that discussion.
Sure. Yeah, I can go ahead and I'll basically the way that I'm planning on doing these draft recommendations is it doesn't need to be like in super detailed, but just, this is what the committee discussed and this is what they're proposing. And then we can finalize any recommendations for for the final report if the whole task force is in consensus on it. But yeah, we can identify some implementation considerations in that as well. That's what I've done for the couple recommendations that I put together for another subcommittee. So
Sounds great. You're on it. Thanks, Aaron. Any other discussion on recommendations around these two topics? All right. Seeing none, we'll move on our agenda to our license review. Aaron, are you leading us through this one or?
Yes, I can, if I can get my ducks in a row and
Okay.
write report. Okay.
So yeah, and I guess Aaron will probably say this as well, but we're going to go through this review of these licensing qualifications, uh, and then same as we just did, if there's any further issues or recommendations we want to bring forward, please bring that up in our discussions.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So committee members, this was kind of the last item, like the last main topic that you guys had decided to work on for your work plan. And I think this had to do, I think it was John Harding that had this request is really to kind of look at for trades professions, what are the licensing requirements for each one? Um, are they um, are they consistent with other states? Are they are there any barriers that that could be identified? And this does play into some of the other work that other subcommittees are doing. If you're on the barriers subcommittee, then you've seen a lot of analysis on specific license types. Or sorry, licensing qualifications. And so this kind of plays into it a little bit, but this is also just for um, trades. And so in this paper, you guys had a lot of reading this week, sorry. But this basically just shows that we're identifying licensing qualification statutes for trades related occupations, and then looking at it, comparing it to some peer states. And so neighboring states is what I mean by that. And then some just potential policy options for legislative consideration. And this is a neutral paper. There is no agenda by the department on any of these policy options, but it's just for your consideration. So you can see these are all the different occupation classes that are evaluated in this paper. And one thing to just kind of keep in mind is that most of these are in Title 37, but there are a couple that are in Title 50, and those are the ones that have to do a little bit more with public safety. So fire protection, boiler operators, fireworks, those types of things. So where this starts is just says that, obviously the question is not are we supposed to, or do you guys want to deregulate, or should licensing be eliminated? But really, if each qualification requirement is necessary, proportionate, portable, and administratively efficient. So you can see the first or second page, I guess, shows just the statutory framework. So you can see where everything is housed right now, and the regulating entity. And so these are all the different programs. Most of the trades occupations are administered by a department program, with the exception of the State Electrical Board and Board of Plumbers. Obviously, those are boards, but everything else is a program administered by the department. And then I'm not going to read through it, but it just kind of talks about some issues for review and some observations. So I'll just go ahead and read this. So the statutory framework is fragmented. Construction-related occupations are spread across Titles 37 and 50. Several programs do combine occupational licensing with public safety regulation. And so you can see this list regulate both worker competency and safety of equipment for materials. And then this is just, and again, these are just observations, but we had recent registration to license conversions with construction contractors and home inspectors. And so, it's a good idea to monitor those and review whether the licensing remains limited to consumer protection and compliance functions, or if it adds new barriers. These are both very new, 6 months in to the effective date. So monitoring is recommended. And then some licenses may be suited to endorsement or national certification recognition. And there's some examples on some occupations where there's national, federal, or industry standard qualifications. And then the next chart talks about just a representative comparison with other states. So didn't evaluate it against all 50 states, just the neighboring states. And so just kind of comparing some requirement types, and then how it appears in trades licensing and a potential barrier concern. So regarding experience or apprenticeship hours, exams, business entity plus individual licensing, continuing education, reciprocity or endorsement, national certification, and fees and renewal cycles. And you can see in the footnote the states that were included in the evaluation. So it's like there's 12, I think, or 11 states, and we would make 12, all in the northwest to west portion of the country. And then occupation specific comparison themes. You could see so for construction contractors. So some states do have full contractor licensure with exams and everything, and others just use a registration focused on insurance, workers' compensation, and tax compliance. And so here's an example. A barrier to evaluate is Montana's conversion from registration to licensure. Does it add any substantive entry barriers beyond compliance verification, which we did already? And so then I'm not going to go through all of it, but each of the occupations has its own little portion of that chart. And so then it goes into potential barriers. And again, these are all just potential. So there's an experience hour and apprenticeship bottleneck, potential barrier, examination access, duplicative business and individual licensing, limited portability, a financial burden, rural access. And so then it kind of goes into some policy options for consideration that this subcommittee can look through. And so I can't remember how many we have, but we've got option 1, expand licensure by endorsement for trades. 2, create temporary or provisional work authorization. 3, recognize national certifications. 4, create or refine limited scope licenses. 5, credit prior learning and experience more broadly. 6, reduce upfront costs. 7, improve rural access through online administration. 8, oh, there's more. 8, consolidate the renewal cycles. And 9, establish a risk-based review framework. This option 9 really plays a lot into the Sunset Subcommittee's work as well. But again, that's what came out of this paper. And then just some priorities, since there are quite a few of these and we don't have a lot of time, is maybe just consider looking at these 5 or 4 or 3, whatever, order it this way. And then just if we need to do any more stakeholder outreach or get some public comment going, here's some questions that we could ask licensing boards and programs, the employers, apprentices, and all the people. So that and then what does the conclusion say? Focus first on recent registration to license conversions, endorsement, temporary practice authority, recognition of national certifications, and risk-based review of classifications. So this does play a lot into the public comments, which is the other document that was provided. A lot of the public comments and recommendations kind of pose these same considerations.
Thank you, Aaron. So do you feel it would be best to go through starting with these priorities that were drafted up here and have discussions through those? Or would the subcommittee like to propose issues off of this document?
Was that a question for me?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's really up to you guys. I think maybe just getting an idea of what the subcommittee is, what stood out to them, or if anything stood out to them, and then kind of narrow it down that way. Or if anybody's got any feedback on it.
Okay. Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, so I understand this is a big document, and I hope everybody did their homework, but we'll have some time going forward to kind of dig through this document some more. After reviewing it, I'll open it up to the committee. Uh, is there anything through this document that we want to discuss today and bring forward any type of proposal? Or is there anything that's standing out to folks that is a concern? So I'll open that up to the subcommittee. John?
Sorry, Mr. Chair. I had an extra long weekend and didn't get through all of these documents. I like what I'm looking at in front of me on what we're talking about right now, but I haven't really been able to um, review it as much as I would like. I don't know that I could specifically at this point say we should do something. There's there's been some conversation from plumbers and electricians regarding out of state folks that potentially, let's say, a Washington resident moves to Montana, which we know there's lots of those folks that have made that choice, and they're electricians and plumbers, and the rules in Washington are maybe slightly different than they are here, and that's for sure. That's a thing, especially when it comes to training hours, anywhere from 3 to 4 thousand hours. You could have a 25-year master plumber that comes from Washington, and he does not have the credentials to work in Montana, um, because he doesn't have the Montana. He doesn't have board's the board's approval, and he only has 3,500 hours of training instead of 4,000. I haven't looked into that. I just know that there's some of those scenarios that exist, especially with plumbers and electricians. And I'll remind the committee that when we talk about um, this licensing thing, as far as uh, contractor licensing, the bulk of these folks are uh, small construction companies, plumbers, electricians. All of those folks kind of fall under that licensing criteria, um, and it's hard to come up with any recommendations. Like I said, without really looking through more of this, I know that construction contractors, there has been for decades, legislatively, there's been, it seems like there's a bill that's introduced fairly regularly that would suggest that contractor registration slash licensing includes um, exams, classifications, um, ongoing education, things that we don't do in Montana. Some states do, just like Erin had had told us in her report that some states have uh, contractor um, licensing with uh, shoot, I'm losing my track here, with educational requirements. Um, a whole different scenario than what we have in Montana. And I'm not going to argue the position one way or another, but for sure the rules would change significantly if we chose to do something such as make a recommendation to move to state licensing with additional requirements. So um, I wouldn't mind, like I said, having a little more time to talk about that, or if there's other suggestions, I'm glad to listen to those as too. But I'll just be honest, I did not get through this document.
Yeah, thank you, John. And it is a ton of information this week. And as you alluded to, I know there is some work going on in the boards individually as well. I know early on in our process, the plumbers um, had kind of self-recognized some of those hour differentials that they had, and I believe, and maybe Aaron could add to it a little, that they've actually had a discussion and are working on legislation through their board uh, that would address a little bit of that. Uh, I think I think we have some time, and Aaron can always correct me if I'm wrong, but to kind of get through this document and come back at later meetings to address anything that folks would like to bring forward. And then obviously, I always like to direct any committee I'm on by the public comment. So maybe there'll be some things in public comment today that will kind of steer how we look at this document, and maybe there'll be some issues raised that way as well. So Allison?
Thank you, Senator Harvey. I thought this was an amazing document for, especially for me, who knows very little about any of the substantive parts of this. But two things jumped out at me, and I was trying to find the first one, but there was a suggestion of limited licenses in here, and considering limited licenses, and the example that I remember seeing was something about plumbers being, house people, residential as opposed to commercial. Um, and that just seems to me like a way to, there it is, limited scope licenses, option 4. I know we're working on that for the legal profession right now, and can definitely be a way to open up doors for people. Um, the other thing was I really highly support the priority recommendation around reducing rural and administrative burdens. Being in Montana, we should always be looking at using distance learning and online applications. And I know that takes money. And so I would support giving the department more money to do those, time scoped projects. Um, that would be those are the two things that jumped out at me.
Okay, thank you, Allison.
Senator Harvey, if I could just chime in real quick.
Yep.
So this is great, and I realize that I can't get these documents to you guys like weeks in advance, and I apologize for that. But there's a lot going on. But I think the best direction for me for this document is some instructions on which ones you would like to see more about and talk about further. If there's ones that are, cross-cutting policies like the Sunset Committee is already, looking at the option 9, I think you guys could say, don't worry about that. We'll let them handle that. Let's focus on, this option. And then we can come back at the June 26th, I believe, is our next subcommittee meeting, the end of June meeting with just a few more detailed, I guess, or refined options. And to the plumbing board, they are actually, I have a draft for them. I have been working with that board on a draft based on you guys all got copies of their recommendations, and there's some other stuff in there too. They actually meet next week. Next Thursday is the next board meeting, so I didn't want to include anything from that in this meeting because I want them to review it first, but I'll be able to provide an update at the June 26th meeting about the Board of Plumbing and their bill draft that they're working on.
Perfect. Thank you, Aaron. Uh, any other options or concerns around this document that we want to discuss at this time or give direction to Aaron to Representative Teal?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did miss and not hear a few things here. So hopefully I'm not repeating anything, but I did like the option 8, the consolidating the renewal cycles and duplicative filings. I think anywhere we could do that, that seems like a great idea. Could someone elaborate a little more on, are some of these forms and things that need to be filed for? So like the same company is maybe filing like every single year and we could switch it to just once every 2 years, or could someone elaborate on some of those? But I think that's a great idea. And I do also, being in the rural part of the state, anything we can do online and the things in option 7, those seem like really good ideas as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Aaron, can you elaborate on that at all, or?
I cannot, but I'm sure
Okay.
Mr. Bragg can.
Yeah.
Yeah. Chair Harvey, Representative Teal, if I could ask you to just restate that for me, I would really appreciate it.
Oh, sure. I like this option 8, consolidate renewal cycles and reduce duplicative filings. And I'm just curious, and maybe I could just follow up another time too, but what kind of things would be reduced? Like, is one company applying for certain things, every year, and we could cut that down to every other year?
Great question, Chair Harvey, Representative Teal. We do have licensees that have several licenses, and currently, again, as Tracy pointed out, the independent contractor certificates and contractor licensing / registration are housed in a different database currently. Again, that should be fixed coming up in the next month, and so that will reduce some of the redundancies that people are having to have when we're looking for duplicative information. And I believe the statute also, Quinlan can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe the statute also allows us to not require updated information unless there's been a specific change. And that's generally how we've been processing renewals, and specifically how we do it for licensing renewals is we ask if anything's changed within the last year. And if it has, then we will follow up on it. Same way we'll process contractor licensing renewals moving forward. And we started to do that with independent contractor certificates. One of the big things that we've done here in the last 6 months is remove the notarization requirement from independent contractor applications, which cuts down on that specific option 8 with the consolidation of the renewal cycles. That makes me a little bit frightened, and I'll tell you why. It's a workload problem. When Tracy talks about 13,000 folks coming in and they're not all needing to renew at a different time. And the reason we didn't change or consolidate those renewal cycles prior to or when we changed from contractor registration to contractor licensing is we wanted things to continue as they had been so much as possible so that businesses who are impacted by that can continue to rely on what they had previously. It also potentially sets up a time frame where somebody gets a license, then has to renew it because we've changed the renewal date, and that creates a duplicative cost, which we're trying to avoid as much as possible. So the consolidation of the renewal cycles, I think that's something excellent to explore. I don't know that it's something that we can get solved as far as workload, specifically during this task force period. So I don't know that I would encourage you to look at that recommendation. The potential for sharing information across different databases, which won't exist again. I think that could certainly be a recommendation to direct staff, to figure out or not figure out, but to direct staff to utilize existing resources or filings in order to verify. I think that's something that's certainly doable and something we try to do and will continue to look at enhancing. I'm just a little bit leery on the renewal cycles just because if we switch that all up, it impacts the business owners, it impacts department staff, it really impacts our fiscal unit when we're processing that amount of payments. So I think I'd probably ask you to steer clear of the renewal cycles at this time, but certainly something that we can explore in the future. And I hope that kind of answered your question, Representative Teal.
Yeah, no, thank you. That helps.
All right. Thank you, Kevin. Further discussion on this document? Well, I'll just make a brief comment while others are thinking here. I really like and would like to take a good look at option 7. I think anything we can do, not only in construction trades, but workers overall, improving access in our rural parts of the state, I think is crucial. I think anything we can do there is good. So, any other comments or suggestions on this form? Representative Teal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I agree with you. I would love to hear if this is an appropriate time. I would like to hear maybe, is there kind of an overview we could get on what sort of things are already in this category? Like are how many things can be applied for online? How much of the education? I would just be curious to kind of know what's already in this format and then what would need to be converted to this format. Thank you.
Thank you. Kevin, can you give kind of a high overview on that, or
You
do you
guys are
have some
killing me
data?
today. Thank you, Chair Harvey. Um, Currently, for both independent contractor and contractor registration, and if there are others, please steer me that way. Neither of those applications can be submitted online. They can be submitted in other ways, but it's still a manual entry on our part, which is one of the things that we have moved towards over the last 2 years since we took over contractor registration and independent contractor in the licensing bureau is to get that into an online system. We are hopeful to launch that in the beginning, or not the beginning, the end of next month. And so that should resolve at least the access problem. One of the main issues that we see here at the department is people show up to apply in person, and that's great. We love seeing people, but certainly somebody shouldn't have to drive from Eureka or Troy or Medicine Lake to try and get their licenses issued and be required to come to see us in Helena. And so that access problem should hopefully be minimized starting next month. I will be candid with you. That is an initial push. There will be follow-up pushes to maximize the system to get it working appropriately and enhanced, and certainly take in the recommendations from the task force as well as other feedback that we get from our stakeholders. But currently, for both contractor licensing slash registration and independent contractors, neither of those can be processed online. We can accept payments online. We do that through an Okta service right now. Once that gets put into Acela, that'll go through our normal Payzang portal, which is a D of A enterprise system that we utilize to process payments. So again, we should see some access be relieved starting next month, and certainly will intend to enhance that system as we move forward.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments on this document? All right, seeing none. Just kind of close this topic. I'd ask all the subcommittee to take a good deep dive through this document. As Aaron said, we have a meeting coming up later in June. I'd really like to get some recommendations or pull some stuff from this document and continue this conversation at that meeting as well. So, all right, moving on. Looks like we're now going to review kind of the summary of public comment and recommendations. Same thing, if anything pops out, please don't hesitate to raise your hand and we'll have a discussion on it. So, Aaron?
Thank you. All right. So this document, basically what happened here is we've been collecting public comment since the beginning of the task force, and you all have access to it. That's posted on the task force website on a weekly basis. And then I also email it out to you in your little meeting materials email. But there's a lot, and we had at the beginning of the task force in February and March, we got a lot of comments. They have kind of started to peter out a little bit, but we still do get comments on a weekly basis for one or more of the subcommittees, and it's because it's so much information, and we really do value the public's input. I thought that it would be helpful for the subcommittees if I just consolidated it all and just provided these are all the recommendations that have come through from the public. They may or may not have already been addressed, but I did want all of it in one, and hopefully you can see that I summarized the comments and came up with some main themes from the actual comments. where, the public wants the subcommittee to look at workforce access and mobility, public safety, competency, rural and small business, insurance, accountability, consumer protection. And then there's some takeaways. So for this subcommittee, the comments don't point uniformly toward deregulation or increased regulation, but they want this committee to distinguish between requirements that protect the public and requirements that may unnecessarily restrict qualified workers. And so kind of going into the previous document that we talked about. And so the strongest recurring areas, so there was a lot of electrical licensure pathways and plumbing competency requirements, and then contractor insurance verification, out-of-state credentials, and representation of built environment professions. And so I did want to note that the comments that we received regarding the Board of Plumbers, I didn't include in this because, as we've already talked about, they are addressing that directly, and so I will be able to present those changes at the June 26th meeting. So in the interest of time, I excluded them from this document. And so then you can go through each of these pages is a different is a separate recommendation, and it's just a very brief, like, here's the recommendation. So for number one, it was creating an electrical helper permit, and then kind of the professions affected and the rationale. So this is what the commenter said, is that workforce challenges and skilled trades make it difficult to hire for simpler tasks, but also, mentioned that guidelines would be needed to prevent the permit from being abused as cheap labor. And so then for each of these recommendations, you'll see this, and then you'll also find a decision tool that you can go through. So basically, first off, does the subcommittee need more information about the recommendation? Yes or no? If you do, I just provided some examples of maybe some additional information that could be gathered before making an actual recommendation. And then should you proceed with the recommendation, yes or no, or table it for future consideration? Do keep in mind we only have 2 meetings left after this. So the table is getting smaller. And then if proceeding with the recommendation, does it need to be amended and how? Or no, this recommendation sounds great, and just Aaron draft a recommendation to present to the full task force. So hopefully you guys had time to at least glance through some of this. It looks like a ton of information, but when you think about it, it's really only just like this first part on each page. But I can't remember how I had this in order. It's probably in no good order. But there's some stuff on HVAC workers, and then again, this is more electricians and whatever. So there's lots. I don't know, Senator Harvey, how you want to go through this. If you want to open it up and just ask the subcommittee if any particular one popped out, and we can just start there, or how you want to proceed with this. But this, hopefully, the idea is, and I think I put this in my email, is that some of these could be pretty easy recommendations that everybody agrees on, that I can draft into a formal recommendation for the June 8th meeting.
Thanks, Aaron. I know, I think it was in healthcare. Did you send this out in a format as like a polling?
I didn't, and so I considered it, but I didn't really have time to put that together this week.
Okay.
But I can. So with the healthcare committee, if you aren't on it, I presented a very similar document to the healthcare committee at their last meeting, and then sent out a poll afterwards for them to use and say and give their responses, like yes, move forward, no, table. And then we're planning on talking about it at the next meeting. And I can certainly do that for this one. And also because it will take quite a while. I can't remember. I think there's like 23 options. But if there's and we can further develop these at the June 26th meeting. But if there are some that this committee for sure wants to talk about today, that maybe is I'm not saying any of this is an easy fix, but like a pretty, I've heard this from a lot of people, and we definitely should look at this. Let's try to develop a recommendation for the next, for the June 8th meeting. We can certainly do that today. Yeah, there's 23,
Okay.
yeah, recommendations. So
Thanks, Aaron. Uh, I guess I would just say on this, I do think a poll would be nice to get the
okay.
input from the subcommittee members. Looking at kind of the consistent comments that we've had throughout our different public hearings, I would kind of focus our recommendations around uh, enforcement. And so I know there's a few recommendations in this list that deal with uh, enforcement. And so that would kind of be my priority on it. But at this time, I'll open it up to the subcommittee if they have any other specific recommendations off this list, or if they have some guidance for Aaron on what they feel we should prioritize. So, go ahead, John.
Well, thank you. So as I look through the recommendations, and once again, guys, I'm going to apologize because I didn't get through the bulk of this, but I can grasp what I'm looking at here pretty quickly. Um, are we expected, or is the plan, Aaron, that we're going to go through each one of these recommendations and answer the questions as to do something with the recommendation for or against, and come up with a reason why? Do we need to respond to every one of these and have a yes, no, and a reason why? Is that what we're?
So, oh, sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair and John. So I don't think there is time to go through one by one by one and force this subcommittee to have a conversation about each one of these. My hope, and when I had sent it out, my hope was that the members could have taken a look at this ahead of time and come up with, one or two that they wanted to talk about. At this time. But if nobody had time to work on this, I know everybody is super busy. And again, I'm sorry I couldn't get it out any earlier. But I can do the poll. I'll do the poll regardless. And if that's the way that you guys would rather do it, is just send it out basically the way, because John, I know you're not on the healthcare committee, so you haven't seen what it looks like, but it's one of those Microsoft forms, and it has all of this information on it, and then just you can click and say, yes, let's move forward, no, let's not move forward, and then I'm just gathering a consensus. And the way the healthcare committee kind of framed it is that unless it was overwhelmingly a no or overwhelmingly a yes, that's kind of how we would move forward with it. And so if 75% or more of the respondents said, yeah, let's work on this recommendation, then we can focus on those at the next meeting. If, 75% of them said no, then there's no need to continue, because the consensus is that that's not something that these people want to address, or that you guys want to address. And so, again, it would be great if you guys could talk about one or two of these, if anybody had time to say, like this one just landed randomly as I was scrolling. So if somebody's like, wow, a recommendation 17, that sounds pretty cut and dry. Let's talk about it and spend 10 minutes and then come up with a recommendation. Or if you would rather just punt it all to the June 26th meeting, I can do that as well. I will ask that, and this is what I asked the healthcare subcommittee, is to complete the poll as soon as reasonably possible, and so I can compile the information and bring it, because again, we are running out of time, and so we need to start moving on these if you guys want to move on them at all.
Well, I could make a couple of comments about a few of these items if you want to take a few minutes. The first 10 items in recommendations, the first 10 are all about electricians. The next 3 are plumbing related. So I won't get into all of that. It seems that with plumbers and electricians and the way that their boards work, that it would be odd for us without having the expertise that the folks that sit on plumbing and electrician boards. It would be odd for us to be making any of these types of recommendations without, I mean, that's what their board's for. They have that actual board that exists that meets on a regular basis, and they would be talking about these types of things. And if something needed to be changed, I would guess that it would come from that board. Either, like I said, plumbers or electricians, because both of those boards are pretty significant in managing their own industries. So I wouldn't think that they would want us to manage this. So like number 10, pursue expanded electrical reciprocity to neighboring states, including Oregon and Washington. I get that. We talked about that earlier. But what does that actually include? Does that include the hours that we're talking about? Does it include that Oregon and Washington, for example, have way different standards than Montana? And I don't know how how we would be able to determine any of that. So, like I said, I've got that, but I mean, we can go on to like number 14, require contractor liability insurance to match contractor's scope of work. When you register as as you get your license as a contractor, you're providing that insurance already, and contractor liability insurance to match the contractor's scope of work is determined by the company that you insure with. So if you are a general contractor and your insurance company recognizes, and we do this all the time, we get audited by our insurance company on an annual basis, and they're auditing the type of work that we do, and they insure us accordingly. So this is, to me, this comment is kind of moot because we already have that. If you have liability insurance and your insurance agent has had any experience with you at all, your insurance matches your scope of work already. So that would be, I don't know what you'd say yes or no there, but you wouldn't have to address that, I don't believe. Item number 15, add a contractor licensing or registration checkbox requiring contractors to confirm they have appropriate liability insurance coverage for the work performed as stated on their license. Same thing. That really falls to the same thing I just talked about, is that happens with you and your insurance agent as they assess the type of work that you're doing annually. Number 16, similar. Require contractors' insurance companies to provide proof of liability coverage directly to the department with coverage commensurate with the contractor's authorized work. So this seems like the same person probably wrote all 3 of these questions, and they all kind of deal with the same exact thing. And those things happen with your insurance agent, and you're providing your contractor your liability insurance, and that's kind of the end of the story in the world of contracting. So all of those to me would be something that we could easily deal with today, Aaron, and say, we don't need to do that because it already happens.
Thank you, John. Jason Small.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to have to concur for the most part with John here. A lot of these requirements, I mean, frankly, people tend to get delusions of grandeur as you're sitting on these subcommittees and boards and some other things, but there are already appropriate boards in place that take care of most of the business that's been, discussed in the, sorry, that is come in via, anyway, what we're just talking about. I'm drawing a blank, but anyhow, um, he brings up a good point with the insurance, that's already covered and done. Um, if we were going to make any recommendations off this list, I think it would, if there was a ton of public outcry and public comment or something like that for us to look at, possibly we deal with that. But basically, every recommendation here is already covered by the board, and the board should be doing their work because they're the ones that know what actually takes place. So, anyhow, that was just a statement I felt like making.
Thank you, Jason. Senator Zonikoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I would just say that sometimes boards implement the rules, they don't question them. And I don't know about these two. So maybe they're a little more technical, the members who've been appointed or larger. I've seen other boards who try to figure out what to do as a board member and follow the rules, not what laws should change because the standards don't match anymore. So I'll just be a little cautious to expect someone else to be doing a job that they don't think is their job. And again, I don't know these two boards specifically, so maybe they are looking into it, but the job of this task force is to ask the questions and see if it works for the legislature to change the laws so then the board can follow those new laws and new standards, not to have the board do that unless the board has that rulemaking authority to change their standards. So let's keep that in mind.
Thank you, Senator. Back to you, John. Do you have more?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't lower my hand, but from the last comment, and I agree with that as well. As far as plumbing and electrical boards, you for sure don't want them building their own set of rules that would be outside of anything that's legislated to them. I'm looking at their their recommendation number 3, allow limited electrical contractor license holders to sign off on apprentice hours for apprentices seeking journeyman licensure at least a defined residential scope. That would be something that seems that electrical board could surely handle, and it wouldn't be changing anything and requiring any type of legislation. And most of these, when I looked at these recommendations, they didn't look to be something that was changing the world.
Thank you, John.
Yep.
Further comments on this document? I got one, just kind of going back through it here. Kind of seems like a fairly easy topic, and Aaron had it up on the screen a minute ago, but it's recommendation 16, and that's putting a requirement on the insurance companies to provide the proof of liability directly to the department. To me, that seems like a streamlining for the contractor and for the department. In lots of these instances, we put people in the middle of a situation that really isn't needed. What do folks think about this recommendation? Any comment on that? Go ahead, John.
I'm sorry. Thank you. So as I'm reading it, we've all had these wonderful conversations with our insurance agent, and by the time you're done having the conversation, if your agent is doing their job, your head is spinning because you don't understand what they presented to you. That's how it works with me, anyways. So, I would defer to my insurance agent at this point, as a licensed contractor, to see if this would have any. If this is simple, or if this creates some sort of barrier, or what this actually means to them. Because how I read it, it wouldn't have any effect on what we already have, because we have to provide insurance when we're an ICE, when we're not, I mean, when we are a registered contractor, we have workman's comp and we have liability insurance. So those things are there. If you're an ICEC, you still have to have insurance, but you don't have to pay work comp. Just a simple comparison of those two. Um, so liability insurance, I believe in, and maybe Kevin could answer that for sure, but I believe I've never filed for an ICEC, but I believe that they have to provide proof of insurance. I know that when we use an ICEC, we have to get their ICEC permit and we have to have a copy of their insurance. So if that's not provided to the state, I thought that it was. So, like I said, without talking to my agent, I mean, I can answer that in 2 seconds after talking to an agent, and they'd go, yeah, that's a good idea, or that's a bad idea, and this is why. So, thank you.
Thanks, John. Kevin?
Yeah, I'm like a demon. If you invoke my name, I appear. Um, Chair Harvey and John, great question. We don't require currently, statute doesn't require for either contractor license or independent contractors to provide liability insurance to the department. So that's a consideration for the task force is whether or not that should be a requirement.
Thank you, Kevin. So, Aaron, I guess I'd like a little more information on this uh, as far as what this would take on the department side, and uh, if we could possibly get some insurance input on this. To me, this just feels like it would take a burden off of the contractor if this data could be shared directly from the insurance company to the department. And to me, it aligns with some of our discussions we've had around enforcement and making sure that the folks that are out there working are actually covered. So, all right. Any other recommendations off of this form that folks would like to discuss at this time?
Mr. Chair, could I make a comment?
Yep.
Uh, so kind of circling back to the discussion about the different boards of the electricians and the plumbers and a lot of these recommendations. Maybe they've thought about it, maybe not, but they'd probably be maybe in a better position to make some of these. Would it be worthwhile to try to coordinate with them at all? I mean, have they kind of seen this list and could we get their input on what they think? And I mean, I'd hate to leave a lot of these out in the open if they're not being addressed. But I also don't want to step on their toes. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Representative. Aaron, can you weigh in on this?
Yeah.
Can you share this with these boards? I know that, the plumbing board has met several times since we've been in this process, and as we've talked about today, they're working on some issues. Has electrical board done the same? Are they aware of some of these issues? And
Yeah.
have they been meeting at all?
So yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And that actually, and Representative Teal, thank you for that as well. That was one thing I was going to just mention is that these are the comments that came in specifically to the construction subcommittee of the task force. There is no uh, guarantee that the electrical board has any idea, unless they're sitting on the call watching, that any of these recommendations have come forward. And so, unlike the Board of Plumbers, those recommendations came directly from the Board of Plumbers to the task force, maybe just for some support, I guess. But those suggestions for like the apprentice or the journeyman licensing apprentice hours, that was directly from the Board of Plumbers that provided that comment to this committee. I don't know who submitted any of these comments. Again, this is just a compilation of all the comments that have been received, and so I can certainly reach out to the state electrical board and share these comments and get an idea, or maybe get one of them to attend the next meeting to talk about their thoughts as well. But keep this in mind that you don't have to recommend a statutory change. You could recommend guidance. You could recommend that the state electrical board address these issues or look at these issues or anything like that. It doesn't have to be you have to change the statute. Otherwise, there's no need for a recommendation. So guidance and direction to boards and direction to the department, those are all recommendations that I would really encourage you to look at if you think these are good ideas. But don't assume that the state electrical board has any idea that any of these concerns are being addressed by these individuals that have provided this comment to this task force.
Senator Zonikoff.
To go back to my original point is like this is a task force recommendation to help remove some barriers and whatnot. So to think that the board should be responsible and no, and we are stepping on their toes is that's not how this works, right? We as legislators set the policy, and these recommendations are coming from the public and whatnot. So that'd be like saying all of our housing stuff. We should have asked cities if we could change the zoning policies. We did it anyway because we thought that was best for the state, not the cities, independent like other organizations. Same thing. Consensus isn't always ideal, so just keep that in mind. Having said that, actually, Mr. Chair, I have to run, so I don't know if it works like this, but you have my vote, or I guess if need be, my vote will follow you if there's anything to vote on. So there you go. You now have 2 votes if that's how the process works.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate the trust. All right. Back to any recommendations off of this list that we want to promote and bring forward to the June 8th meeting. All right. I'm not seeing any. Aaron, I would ask.
Representative Teal has her hand up.
Oh, sorry about that. Representative Teal.
Oh, thanks, Mr. Chair. I just thought I'd mention the recommendation number 15, adding the checkbox to the registration list, confirming if they have appropriate coverage. That seems like an easy one to me. Maybe that's one we could recommend. Thanks.
Thank you, Representative. I agree. I think that's a good one to move forward with. So. All right. Last call for promoting any of these recommendations. All right. Seeing none. Aaron, you said you are going to follow up and send this out as a poll just to verify.
Yeah, so I'll just recap real quick what I heard. So I will prepare a draft recommendation for the June 8th meeting for the full task force to consider recommendation number 15 only on this document, and then also what we had talked about earlier on the ICECs. And so there will be, from what I can gather, there will be 2 recommendations that the Bob, I think, is the one that's going to be presenting. He'll be able to present to the full task force for consideration for this subcommittee. And then separately, I will send out a poll. I will work on that and try to get it out to you today. And so you have So you have it, and then you can use this document to guide your answers on the poll to try to get an idea of how to prioritize any of these for the June 26th meeting. And then I'll ask that that poll be completed like in the next 2 weeks. And so I will have time to pull together additional information and so we can come prepared to really talk about these based on what the full subcommittee thinks as far as moving forward with either gathering more information or whatnot. And then I will also reach out to the state electrical board and just say, hey, these comments have been or these recommendations have been suggested to the task force. Are you addressing any of them, or do you have any input you would like to give? And then I can also ask a representative from the state electrical board to attend the next meeting so you can ask them questions directly.
Thank you, Aaron. Just to enter into the conversation here, I would also promote moving forward recommendation 19. This is definitely kept with kind of our overarching theme of enforcement. I feel that if there's mechanisms that the department can use to kind of crack down on these unlicensed and labor trafficked folks, I think that gets to the root of a lot of the issues that have come forward. Um, so I would recommend that we move forward with um, seeing what we can do around recommendation 19.
Mr. Chair, did you want to have just more information, kind of go through the what exists the through the decision tool? Do you want me to gather that information to talk about at the June 26th meeting, or do you want to go straight to a recommendation?
I guess information doesn't hurt.
Okay.
So yeah, if we can get that information around the complaint volume and kind of the amount of activity we're seeing around this, that would be good. So
Okay. And I think that one thing that could be helpful for this discussion is an update on the legal act that was enacted last year, because that talks a little bit about um, the immigration status and all of that kind of stuff. And so um, that, we've just kind of started working through that legislation, but I think maybe an update on that would be helpful.
perfect. Thank you. All right. Now the last call for recommendations. All right. Seeing none, thank you, Aaron. It sounds like we got a few things to present at the June meeting and some more work to do on the 26th. So, at this time, is there any outstanding issues that any of the subcommittee members would like to bring forward? Um, any further issues and any instructions to staff that we would like to share? All right, seeing none. Aaron, do you need anything before we move to public comment?
No, I don't. I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. As it's been discussed today, our next full board meeting is the 8th. Then our next subcommittee meeting is June 26th. And then our last meeting will be for the subcommittee will be August 7th. Is that correct, Aaron?
It is.
Okay. All right. We'll now offer public comment to those in attendance. You'll have the opportunity to comment on any public matter under the jurisdiction of the subcommittee that is not on the current agenda. The subcommittee cannot act but will listen to comments and may ask staff to place the issue on a future agenda. So at this time, I'll open it up to public comment. And Aaron, I'll turn it over to you as far as the promotions and all of that. So.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So if you do wish to make a comment, please raise your hand, and we will start with Keith Allen.
Welcome, Mr. Allen.
Hello, how's it going today?
Good, good, good.
Good. Once again, want to thank all the staff for doing all the bulk of the work for everybody and the subcommittees for doing what you're doing. I'm a master electrician. I belong to what would be one of the stakeholders groups, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. I've been involved in the public process with the State Electrical Board at almost every meeting since 1998. And I lobbied the legislature for our issues for 11 sessions from 99 to 2017. So all my knowledge comes from those interactions. Um, Going back to the previous document, the trades related licensing qualifications, barriers to entries, and policy options. If you go, I want to start on like page 3, where there's the common comparison points, and just bring some things to your attention that might save you guys some work in the future, because I believe there's a lot of these things that are brought forth are because there's a lack of education from the licensees as to how the actual laws and rules and processes work. So with that first one, experience or apprenticeship hours, um, there's what I want to bring up on that one is there's no delay in an electrical contractor hiring someone to be a registered apprentice. I believe the Apprenticeship Bureau even has a process in place for them to start an apprentice before the actual apprenticeship agreement is signed with their area Department of Labor rep. And if there's a lack of sponsoring employers, then there's more than likely a lack of work in that area. You know, if you build it, they will come, comes to mind, not the other way around. For the next one with examinations, you have one test to pass, whether you're a residential, journeyman, or master applicant. There are 3 different tests, but there's only one test per license. The state contracts with PSI. I don't know what that company's total name is, but they have testing sites all over the country and the state. The license application can go test at. There's no problem here for electrical, at least. That's not a barrier to licensing. The business entity plus individual licensing, you know, if you want to be a licensed electrician, you pay that fee. If you want to take that next jump and become a licensed electrical contractor, then you pay that fee, just like anyone else. That's also not a barrier to licensing. For our continuing education, we only have to get 16 hours per 2-year cycle. That's nothing. There are plenty of online CEU providers that do online classes. That's not a barrier to licensing. Almost everyone has internet. Take an online class. For the reciprocity and endorsement, again, just for the electrical board, we belong to the National Electrical Reciprocal Alliance, NERA. And if you want to see the map, it's nerastates.org/members-map. There's 19 states that are in that reciprocal agreement. There's 16 states with similar licensing requirements, and this also includes Washington and Oregon. Montana, for a long time, has had a state-to-state agreement with Oregon and Idaho. So that goes to one of the public comments. They're already included in that. So only 15 states aren't reciprocal or have similar licensing requirements. And with the substantial equivalency issues that were pushed by the lawyers and passed through the legislature, it's easier than ever to get a Montana license if you're in a substantially equivalent state. That's not a barrier to licensing. Now, it's possibly a barrier to our electricians going to other states to obtain work. There was recently, because of substantial equivalency, there was recently a Montana electrician that was a master that wanted to um, reciprocate to a journeyman license in Idaho to go to work over there. And what was explained to me by the DOL is because of substantial equivalency, they wouldn't allow it. So he had to downgrade his Montana master license to a journeyman license to reciprocate to an Idaho journeyman license. And now, if he wants to get his Montana master back, he's going to have to take that test again. So maybe there could actually be something administrative rule wise to fix that situation if someone needed to, if they'd previously had a journeyman license and had to downgrade for another state, that the state could just give them their journeyman license back and keep their master's license. For fees and renewal cycles, we have a 2-year licensing cycle, but a 3-year code cycle. We used to have a 3-year licensing cycle, and that would coincide with the code cycle. In the early 2000s, the Department of Labor pushed for it legislatively to have a 2-year cycle because of legislative appropriations. We opposed that. Now you do have times where you may be taking the same CEU classes in 2 different licensing cycles because they occur during the same code cycle. So, but that's not a barrier to licensing either. Local overlays, there's no local licenses for electricians or contractors. You may, if you're a contractor, you may have to have a business license, but that's not an electrical contractor's license. Um, just go over to the public comment list a little bit. On a lot of the ones dealing with electrical, recommendation 1 about creating an electrical helper permit, we're strongly opposed to that. All you have to do is register someone as an apprentice. The state ratio is 2 apprentices to 1 journeyman. You don't need more unlicensed people that are a helper. Just make them be an apprentice and carry on. Teach them to learn a trade and have a career. Recommendation 3 for the limited electrical contractor to sign off on apprentice hours. This one doesn't quite make sense because hours are already approved by the contractor each month. They're sent to the Department of Labor Apprenticeship Bureau. If a residential apprentice wants hours to count towards a journeyman license that's not residential, then that person needs to go through a journeyman apprenticeship program. And if someone changes to another employer that can do more than residential work, those employers already have the leeway to grant credit for the residential hours they've already earned. And if you go to take your journeyman license test, you can't have more than 50% of your hours be residential in nature. That's a current administrative rule. So I'm not sure. I think that comment just kind of goes to the lack of understanding on how everything works. Recommendation 4, reassess the scope of work that limited contractors may perform. That's not a good idea. If someone's strictly skilled and knows residential work, you don't want them stepping up to do commercial work if they're not properly trained in doing that. They've made a choice to be limited in nature to do residential work. They need to stay there until they get more experience to become commercial contractors. This is about public safety. Recommendation 5, the 4,000-hour commercial experience. You need to have more experience in the trade when you turn out as a journeyman before you can become an unlimited contractor. And when you do that, you can wire anything from a garage to a power plant or a refinery. Recommendation 6, consider alternatives for limited shops again to seek or master licensure. That's you can't do that either. Only so many residential hours count towards your master's license qualification because you need to be more of a rounded electrician to do commercial and industrial work. Again, this is about public safety and not selling licenses. Recommendation 7, that's actually probably a good idea. Those are some of those reference materials are actually tools of the trade, and it doesn't make sense why you can't use more of the things you've already learned throughout your apprenticeship. On recommendation 9, that can kind of be I don't see yes or no, but some things you need to think about is who's going to do that and who's going to pay for it. Do you have the state electrical inspectors do it? The ones that are actually licensed electricians and not plumbers that are cross-trained to be electrical inspectors? Just something to think about. Recommendation 10, I already covered that with all the states we're reciprocal with. And down to recommendation 19, that's an excellent idea. The state needs to get out in the field and aggressively enforce our licensure laws just as much as the cops enforce speeding tickets, DUIs, and drugs. And unlicensed practice is rampant. You could have your task force of license inspectors and electrical inspectors. They could start in any of our major cities, and especially Bozeman and Big Sky area to curb this. You need to get behind the gates of the Yellowstone Club as well. So thank you. Appreciate everything you guys do.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Mr. Allen.
Anyone else wish to provide public comment? If so, please raise your hand now. All right, Mr. Chair, that was it for public comment.
Thank you, Aaron. All right. Anything else for the subcommittee? All right. I will officially call this subcommittee to a close, and I look forward to seeing you all on June 8th.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.